All right, so quadratic formula. So of all the ways that you learn to solve quadratic equations, you've done it by factoring, and I believe you still do it by completing the square in algebra. And I know if you had me in geometry, we solved them by completing the square for certain circular items. Um, but those are limited. There's the quadratic formula, and that allows you to solve any quadratic equation whatsoever. If it can't be factored, you know, sometimes you can't solve it that way, but you can always solve a quadratic equation with the quadratic formula. Okay, we're going to skip this first example here because we're not going to monkey around with completing the square and go right down to here. So this, if you had this in Algebra 1, it should look familiar. If I have a quadratic equation in this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, then we can solve this for x with this formula. So x will equal, now, all these a's, b's, and c's, right, they are not, they're just a number, right? They're just the coefficient, okay? So don't be putting your x's and stuff in there. Right? It's just the coefficient, the number in front of the x squared and the x and the one tacked on the end. And now the other thing that must also happen before you can use this formula, and it's a lot like when you have to solve it by factoring, it must equal 0, okay? It must equal 0, right? And if your quadratic equation doesn't equal 0, you have to make that happen before you can use the quadratic formula, okay? So let's just look at an example here. So exercise 2, use the quadratic formula shown above to solve the equation in exercise 1. So that one we skipped was, let's see, x squared minus 6x plus 1. Okay, so x squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So it already equals 0. So just to take some baby steps here, it's been a little while, we need to know what a, b, and c are. Okay, they are the coefficients in front of the variables. So in this case, what does a equal?
A would equal 6.
No. What's in front of the x squared? What number?
1.
1, right? It's not written. We assume a 1 there. What does b equal?
B would equal -6.
Negative 6, right? Not 6. Negative 6. And what does c equal?
C would equal 1.
1. Okay, so now we know what they are, and I'm not going to ask you to write those down all the time, right? I want to do that to be specific. Notice I didn't include any x's in it. It's just the number in front, okay? So let's plug this into our quadratic formula up here, right? And work it through and get it in the calculator and solve it, okay? Now, in algebra, you also did put things in simplest radical form, right? Where you find the biggest perfect square factor. Does that sound familiar? I hope it does, because we did it in geometry a lot. I'm assuming you did it in algebra, right? Anyway, so let's plug this in for x, solve for x. So x equals negative, oh, I didn't even write negative there, did I? That's a -6, right? So x equals negative 6, right? Negative b plus or minus the square root of, or b is, so -6 squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, hang on, we got an announcement. Okay, all right, so let's go. Notice how I did the negative b out here, right? -6 it is, and that actually then becomes what? Positive 6, right? So our next step is x equals positive 6 plus or minus the square root of, what is -6 squared? Notice how I have it in the parentheses, correct?
-6 squared be 36.
Positive 36, right?
36.
Okay, minus, well, 4, right? All over just 2. All right, what is 36 times 4, or 36 minus 4, duh?
42.
The square root of 32 all over 2. Okay, so now is where we want to simplify that square root of 32. Let's see how much you remember here. What is the biggest perfect square factor of 32? Remember our perfect squares? Do you remember what a perfect square is? When you take the square root of a perfect square, what do you get?
Yeah,
You get a whole number, right?
yeah, you get a whole number.
So for example, you would agree that 4 is a perfect square. What's the square root of 4?
A square root of 4 will be 16.
Square root.
Wait, square root.
No, square root.
No,
of
2.
2. What's the square root of 9?
3.
9's a perfect square, right? So the square root comes out of the whole number 3, right? Square root of 16 is 4, okay? They come out of the bracket as a nice whole number. So of our perfect squares, what's the biggest one that goes into 32? Sometimes you need to make a list of perfect
8,
squares.
I think.
Let's go to the notes page real quick. This will be helpful for you because you can generate a list of perfect squares pretty easily, right? Let's go over here real quick. Sounds like your perfect square. Let's make some perfect squares. So let's start with 2. What is 2 squared, guys? 4, right? What's 3 squared?
9.
9. 4 squared?
16.
5 squared? 25. What's 6 squared?
25. It's going to be 36.
So all these results are perfect squares, right? 7 squared is 49, etc., right? 8 squared is 64, right? So these that I'm circling are perfect squares. And when you take the square root of it, you get a nice whole number, don't you? Right? So sometimes it's helpful to make that list. So of these that I've made, is there one of them that goes into 32 evenly? You could take your calculator and start dividing 32 by perfect squares and see which one. Let's say, I don't know, 32 divided by, we'll start with 25. No, it doesn't go in evenly, right? How about 32 divided by 16?
4.
Hey, 2. There you go. So that perfect square 16 goes into 32 a nice even 2 times, right? So let's go back here. So I can rewrite my square root of 32 as the square root of 16. Oh, good grief. Always does this. As the square root of 16 times the square root of 2, can I? What in the wide world of sports? 16 times the square root of 2. All over 2. Right? So I took out that nice perfect square factor of 16. Now, what is the square root of 16? What's the square root of 16?
That would be 4.
4. So 4 square roots of 2 all over 2, right? Okay? So let's now simplify this, right? I can rewrite this now. See if I want to do it this way or the other way. What did I decide to do? Let's break it up into 2 fractions now. So x equals 6 over 2 plus or minus 4 square roots of 2 over 2, right? You guys know to do that. And let's simplify that. So x equals 6 divided by 2 is 3, plus or minus 4 divided by 2 is what? 2 square roots of 2, right? How many answers is that? How many solutions is that?
There would be 2 solutions.
Okay. So let's work out what they are. Let's do the plus on the calculator. Let's get a decimal. Let's go to the nearest hundredth, okay? So let's do 3 plus 2 square roots of 2. So do that. A lot of times you'll want a decimal answer. So in homework, I'm going to ask you to put them in simplest radical form like this, and then get a decimal answer for each, right? So let's go to calculator. And then I want to do calculations. I forgot my book. Hang on. So that's 3 plus 2 square roots of 2 will be one of them, right? So 3 plus 2, and where's the square root on this guy? Square root of 2, right? We get 5.83. And now here's the handy thing with this. I don't have to type, like, this one's not too bad, but if it's real messy, I can just hit the up arrow a couple times. Look. Like, or to the left, I guess, up to the left. And hit OK. And now I can just go and change that to minus. Right? And then, so then 0.17. So 5.83 or 0.17. So let's go pencil that in. Which is where now? Get that out of here. So x equals 5.83, and it's always or, not and. Or x equals what did we say it was? 17. All right. So does anybody have any questions on what we did with that one? Okay. Let's move on to this next exercise. I don't know why they bother making these multiple choice, but anyway. So we want to solve this thing here. We're going to use a quadratic formula. What does A equal?
A equals 1.
What does B equal?
10.
No.
Oh, negative 10.
Negative 10. And C equals?
20.
20. So let's plug it in. So x equals negative b, negative 10, plus or minus square root of, and that's got to go in parentheses to square the negative, right? B squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? So let me give you guys a minute, see if you can go in and simplify this. Okay? And we'll see who comes up with the right answer. So I'm going to give you about a minute and a half here to mess with this. Okay? I'll start. Go ahead. I heard an Somebody get an answer?
Yeah.
What do you think it is?
It would be. It'd be number 4.
Choice 4. That's what it is. So if you didn't get that, let's walk through it here. So simplify everything. X equals, that'd be positive 10 now, plus or minus the square root of positive 100, right? Minus 4 times 1, minus 80, right? All over just 2. Go along on it. Yep. Why does this do this to me? Okay. And then 100 minus 80 is 20. Plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. But let's break 20 up into its perfect square factors. What is the biggest perfect square factor of 20?
4 times square root of 4 times square root of 5.
Because 4 is a perfect square, right? Divided by 2. Okay? I guess I'll go up to the top here a little bit. So x then,
Square root of 4 would be 2.
10 plus or minus 2 square roots of 5.
Divide by 2. That means that would be x equals 5 plus or minus square root of 5.
Right? I didn't show where I broke up into the 2 fractions, if anybody missed that, all right? And then if you needed the decimal, you could just put that in your calculator twice, once with the plus, once with the minus, right? Any questions on that one? All right, let's go over to the next page. Or that, there we go. Recording. Okay, so exercise 4. It wants to solve this quadratic by factoring and then by using it. So we're going to skip the factoring part because I just want to get into using the quadratic formula. Okay? So let's correctly identify A, B, and C here. What is A in this thing?
A would be 2.
2. What is B?
B would be 11,
11, and C is
negative 6.
negative 6. Okay? So let's plug it in there. So X, I'll move to the left here because I know I'm going to need a little room. Negative B, negative 11, plus or minus the square root of 11 squared minus 4 times A times negative 6, right? All over 2A, 2 times 2 this time. So notice up under the square root, right? We got the 11 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 6, right? We've got a negative times a negative there, right? So isn't that going to be the equivalent of adding?
Yeah.
So negative 11 plus or minus the square root. What is 11 squared? 121.
121.
All right. And we know we got a negative times a negative, so it's going to be plus 4 times 2 is 8. And then 8 times 6 is 48, right? All over, well, it's going to be 4. All right, so let's simplify it. Negative 11 plus or minus the square root of, what is 121 plus 48? Good, 169 over 4. Turns out 169 is already a nice perfect square, isn't it? Anybody know the square root of 169?
14.
13, yeah. So X equals negative 11 plus or minus 13 all over 4, right? Well, none of those are divisible by 4, so let's do this. So X, let's do the plus side first. What is negative 11 plus 13? All right, guys.
2.
So that'll be 2
2
over
divided by
4.
4 would be.
Oh, hang on. Or
1 half.
X, yeah, or X equals, now let's do negative 11 minus 13. Negative
That would
24,
be
right?
24. 24
Negative
divided by
24.
negative 24 divided by 4 would be.
So we get X equals 1 half or
X equals negative 6.
negative 6. 2 solutions. Whenever you have a quadratic equation, you always get 2 answers, right? Anybody have any questions on that one? Okay, let's work through a couple of these down here. Bottom. Identify A, B, and C correctly. Be very careful with your arithmetic, right? Your order of operation and whatnot, all right? All right, so let's take A here. Yeah, let's do A. So in part A, what is A?
A would be 3.
B.
B would be 5.
And C?
And
C is
C
2,
would be 2.
right? All right, so let's plug this one in. Just do a bunch of these. So X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4A, a little longer, C all over 2A. That's our 3. So let's just start carefully doing order of operation again. So X equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of, would that be 25? And there's no negative times a negative in there, right? So that'll just be minus whatever. So 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24. This one's going to be simple, right? Over 6.
And that would mean that X equals negative 5 plus or minus square root of 1 divided by 6.
What's the square root of 1? 1, right? Over 6. Well, neither one of those have 6 as a factor, right? Did we do something right? Yeah, okay. Well, anyway. So let's do negative 5 plus 1. What's negative 5 plus 1?
-4
negative
Divide by
4
6.
over 6, or
And that'll be 2, -2 divided by 3.
hold on, so let's get the other side in there first. What is negative
4.
5 minus 1?
That'd be -6
Negative
divided by
6.
6
Whoops, I forgot to put x equals.
would be -1.
X equals negative 6 over 6. So we get x equals, let's put this one in lowest terms. Negative 4 over 6, divide them both by 2, and you get what? Negative 2/3, right?
Yeah, -2 source for x equals 1, -1.
Negative 1, right? Circle your final answer. Right?
Did I say 6 over 6?
Negative 6 over 6, yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. All right. Let's go over to part B. Now, in part B, I want you to get your answer in simplest radical form, right? And then I want both the decimal answers to part B, okay? So identify A, B, and C correctly, plug it into the quadratic formula, and let's get, again, I want simplest radical form, where you take out biggest perfect square factor and simplify, and then I want decimal answers to the nearest 2 decimals for each one, okay? So let's take a minute and see who, okay, well, I went through that whole problem and I forgot to hit the record button, so if anybody's watching this video later, maybe you can pause it and look through the steps here we went through, okay? In the meantime, let's move on. I think we'll have done enough if we get through D. So let's say we'll look at D. What does A equal in D?
A would equal 5,
B is,
B is 8,
and
and
C
C is
is
-4.
negative 4. Remember, none of those x's go with it. And then, you know, you might have, instead of an x in there, you might have an equation like in physics with a t for time instead of an x, right? It'll work the same way. Your quadratic formula will just say t equals whatever, okay? All right, so let's all take a moment and see if we can work this through. I'd like to get an answer from someone else, if you don't, no offense, Antonio, but I need to see if others are catching on here, okay? So work through D. Let's see if someone else can get, and I want the answer in simplest form and in decimal form, okay? Record, keep forgetting that. So x equals -8 plus or minus the square root of, there's our 64, right? So we have a negative times a negative in here, right? So we know that'll be what? Positive, right? So 4 times 5 is 20, and then 20 times 4 is 80. Do we agree? All over 10. Okay? If there's something I do, any one of these steps, stop me. Okay, x. Good gravy. X equals -8 plus or minus the square root of what? 144, right, kids? Hey, is 144 a perfect square, guys?
Yes.
Yes, it is, right? What's the square root of 144?
It would be 12.
Right? Some of you might be going in to find the biggest perfect square factor of 144. In fact, it's 12. It's a perfect square, right? All over 10. Okay? Has anybody lost about anything up to this point?
Yeah, where do you get 12 from?
What's the square root of 144?
It's 12.
12. Right? Because 12 squared is 144. Yeah? You got that, Brooke?
How do you get the 144? Oh, it's plus. Never mind, I got it.
Yeah, that negative times 64 plus 80, right? Yep. We good here then? All right, so this one looks like it'd be handy to break it up into 2 fractions and simplify, right? So we get x equals -8/10, right? Plus or minus 12/10. Yeah? And let's put those in lowest term. We don't have to even deal with radical anymore, right? What's -8/10 in lowest terms? I'll go up, back up.
What did I have to say?
Divide both by 2, right? So we get x equals negative 4/5 plus or minus, what's that next one become? 6/5, right? Anybody get lost here? I just put those two fractions in lowest terms, right? So now that's one of the answers, right? So that's the simplified, simplest form answer, right? And now I can go put this in my calculator, right, and get my decimals. So let me do that. Let's be clear, be careful about how we do this, okay? So we got to put in this plus that fraction, and then again, this minus that fraction there. So let's go ahead. And it was, I'm going to use like parentheses and divided for my fractions. You should do the same, okay? So I'm going to do the negative 4/5, right? So negative parentheses 4 divided by 5. Now I need to get out, right? I need to arrow over to get my parentheses there, right? Negative 4/5, and then plus the other one. What's the other fraction? It was 6/5, right? Plus 6 divided by 5. Get your cursor out so you can put the right, group it correctly. All right, with me there? Hit OK. So we get 0.4 is one of our answers, right? And now instead of typing this thing in again with the minus, remember I can just go up, go over here, hit OK, bring it down. So now I can just kind of arrow over that, hit that little backspace button there,
Nice.
and hit minus, and now I'll get my other answer. So x equals 0.4, or x equals negative 2. Anybody have any questions on getting these in the calculator correctly? All right, so 0.4 and negative 2. So x equals 0.4 or x equals negative 2. Okay. You guys think you want to try another one? Maybe because C, I believe, will have something you have to do simplest radical form. Some of you want to see another one?
I'm good.
Well,
Why
somebody
am I
else
doing
might.
these things?
Somebody else might want to. Brooke or Kelsey, do you want to try another one out? Make sure you got the hang of it. So,
Oh, okay.
so you were saying the square root thing you're having. It's just for clarity. You having trouble understanding like the concept of square root itself, or doing the simplest radical form stuff?
Yeah, like after the square root stuff, like I get lost. Yeah.
So in this example here, the square root of 144, right? That is just 12. You get that part, right?
Kinda.
Like the easier like stuff, like this, if they have like a solid answer, then yeah, it's easy. But when
The simplest radical form. Okay. Well, so confused, but so what is? Let's take what is 12 squared? 12 squared is what? 144. But then when you do the opposite of 144, take the square root of it, you get 12, right? So that's just square root unto squaring, basically, right? So it's the simplest radical form stuff. Whoopsie daisy. Okay. Actually, I should have circled it because that's all part of the answer. Anyway, where was one that had? Let's take a look up here. So, in good grief, this stupid smart. All right. So this, you see this square root of 12, guys? So square root of 12 is not a perfect square, right? It won't come out as a nice whole number. But as it turns out, it does have a perfect square factor. Let's go, we listed off a bunch of them, right? Remember, these are perfect squares, right? Because what is the square root of 4? It's 2, right? What's the square root of 9? 3, right? Nice whole number. Square root of 16 is 4, right? When you take the square root of those perfect squares, they come out as a nice whole number, okay? Like the square root of 2 is some decimal that goes on forever, right? It's not pleasant to work with, okay? So what you want to do, like that 12, of these perfect squares that we have, what's the biggest one of those that divides into 12 nicely? What's the biggest of these that goes into 12? Hey, Kelsey, what's the biggest one, Kelsey, that goes into 12? Do any of these go into 12, Kelsey? Or anybody? Okay, well, does,
Oh.
3 equals 4.
4 does. So 12 is actually 4 times what? 3, isn't it? See how we broke up our square root of 12 and the square root of 4 times the square root of 3? Why did I break out the square root of 4? Because the square root of 4 is a nice whole number, right? It comes out, what is the square root of 4? I'll just tell you, it's 2 times,
2.
then we have the square root of 3. So that's the simplest radical form of 12. Let's try, I don't know. Let's try the square root of 125. Let's see if we can break that up into 2. Now, of these, and these perfect squares, we can keep going on with that list if we need to, right? But what's, I think we have it there. What's one of those is the biggest perfect square factor of 125? Which one of those?
5.
Well, 5 is not a perfect square. Did you mean to say 25? The ones I circled are the perfect squares, right? So which of those perfect squares that are circled there goes into 125 nicely?
25.
Okay, 25 times what? Twenty-five times what gives you 125? Think of quarters in your pocket, maybe.
25 is 5.
5 of them, right? Makes $1.25, right? So this is equivalent to the square root of 125. They have the same value, right? But now I can take this and take a nice square root of it. What is the square root of 25? What's the square root of 25?
5.
5. And then square root of 5. See, the square root of 5's got to stay in because it's not a perfect square, so it stays in there. So perfect square factors can come out like that. Does that help you guys that are kind of struggling with the simplest radical form? I know it's been a while.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, there's other ones. Sometimes you'll have some big number and you know, you haven't run your multiplication tables up that far. So here's the thing you could do, right? Let's say I had, what's the number? Let's try, I'm going to do this on my calculator. So here's my list of perfect squares, right? Give me a second to think here of a nice one. Let's see. Let's try 72. Let's say we want to do the square root of 72. Right? Maybe that's one of you. 72. So maybe I don't know. I mean, you don't know which of these perfect squares goes into 72 nicely. So what I could do, and I want the biggest one, right? As it turns out, there might be more than one that goes into it, right? You with me on that? Like 9 goes into it, doesn't it? Right? 9's a perfect square, 9 times 8, right? But I don't think 9 is the biggest one. So here's what I would do. I would take my calculator, take 72, maybe I'll make this smaller. Man, I'm gonna make this stupid thing smaller. So I can fit. All right, I'm gonna do it this way. Okay, so square root of 72. So I'm just going to take 72 and start dividing by perfect squares up here, right? So I don't know. Maybe I'll start with dividing it. I want to start high and go low, right? So maybe I'll start dividing it by 49. Whoops, got to divide, don't I? Divided by 49. See, no, that doesn't go in evenly, right? Some decimal, right? Let's try 36. I'm just taking my 72, dividing it by perfect square. Divided by 36. Oh, see? 36 is a perfect square. It goes in a nice, neat 2 times. Does that make sense? Now, it turns out, why do they start high and go low, right? Because if I did 72 divided by 9, well, I'll get that too, right? But it's not the biggest one. You want the biggest one. So that's why I start high and go low when I start dividing. Does that make sense to you guys? So we can rewrite 72 as 36 times 2, right? So let's do that. So we can rewrite this as a square root of 36 times the square root of 2. And what is the square root of 36? It's 6 and square root of 2. All right, does that help you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. You just take some practice. I mean, probably what you should do is just somewhere have a list. You understand how to make a list of perfect squares, right? Just start
Yeah.
squaring these whole, like, and the next one would be 8 squared, which is 64, and 9 squared, you got 81, right? 10 squared is 100, 11 squared is 121. You can just keep going, right? 12 squared is 144, etc. 15 squared is 225, so 225 is a perfect square. That help you someday, right? Okay. All right, I don't know if we need to run through this whole other one here. So maybe I'll just leave it like this. So the problem set, I'm going to whittle it down a little bit. So let me just draw this here. So your problem set is just going to be number 1 and 6. And it doesn't sound like much, but number 1 has quite a few that go with it. Get you practicing. And for number 1, I want answers in simplest radical form. Answers in, like I was doing up here, right? Simplest radical form and nearest tenth. 1 decimal, right? Okay, so this is your problem set. So despite the directions, right, for number 1, I think number 1 is going to say simplest radical form, but I want that and I want the nearest tenth as well. You know, like I did up, you know, kind of like part B up here, right? Simplest radical form, and then both of them in the nearest tenth. Because at some point it's going to be more useful to have a decimal answer for these two. Okay? Anybody have any questions? You kind of catching on here? And that's the only lesson we're going to do today, by the way. So it sounds like it's going to be enough for you to chew on, right? Does anybody have anything they want to ask about this before they take off and try it on their own?
When we come back.
Yep, okay, hang on.